Hi, it's Marilyn from Simply Their Story, aiming to bring you more information and knowledge about the characters in the Bible. Today's story is one taken from the Old Testament in 1 Samuel 25, and it's a name you probably just skimmed over because her story is really short, but it's such a beautiful story with so much theological significance, and I hope that I really encourage you today. Number one, go and read it in 1 Samuel chapter 25. And give it some thought and explore the concept. If you enjoyed the story, please pop over to my website, www.simplytheirstory.com, and you can read the transcript of the story. You can also find a link to the podcasts, and you can see the research behind the story where I get some of my extra information and things from. I really hope you enjoy the story. If you have a favorite Bible character that you'd like to know more about and hear their story, please let me know and I'll do what I can to bring it to you. The story of Abigail is one of courage, a story of quick thinking, a story of quick action to save others from somebody else's folly. Scripture presents her as a beautiful, intelligent woman whose lot in life is to be married to a fool. Abigail reveals how wisdom and determination can save good people from disaster. Abigail's example points to the importance of the words we choose when speaking in tense situation, how harsh, loud words may become the catalyst to unnecessary explosions. It may drive individuals to regrettable actions. And in contrast, we see Abigail calm, carefully calculated words that lead to a very peaceful resolution and a lovely twist in the tale. So enjoy the story of Abigail. Isn't it a beautiful day? I love this time of year when the sky is blue and the harvest is in and sheep shearing is complete. I love the celebration and the joy of it all. The seasons turn and we have so much to be thankful for, and God is so good. The sound of ribald laughter reminds me of another sharing time when I was married to my first husband. A different time, a difficult time, and a very dangerous time. The story takes place in southern Jordan area. The great prophet Samuel had died and the nation wept for him. I lived in the small town of Mayon. We had quite a large place there, but we have a summer home in Carmel. As my husband was a farmer, though he did prefer the title wealthy landowner. You get an idea, right? Nabal was a descendant of Caleb, the great man who had seen the promised land and knew that God could give it to his people. This made Nabal one of the tribe of Judah. Unfortunately, Caleb's love and trust in God had not passed down to my husband, who was mean, churlish man. He was arrogant, and he felt that his wealth put him far above the rules of decent society. He was a harsh and dogged man, greedy and foolish. So no, this was not a match made in heaven. But married to him I was, and I carried out my duties, loving God, grateful for all I did have. It was also a time of political unrest. Saul was still king, but his behavior was not godly or regal. He'd fallen out with David, the God-appointed successor, and he had been hunting him across the land. But we weren't a terribly political family. My husband cared only for accumulation of wealth and status, and we lived quietly in our rather lavish home. Now, our shepherds had about 1,000 goats and 3,000 sheep up at Carmel. The grazing was really good and near our summer home and was really suitable for shearing and harvesting. Sometimes there was a risk of marauding bandits who would attack the shepherds and steal the livestock, but this year we had been so fortunate and lost none at all. So Nabal and I had moved down to Carmel, as is customary, to celebrate with feasting and festivities. Nabal went to count his earnings, harass his staff, and gloat at his profits. I went to make all the arrangements, but I'm not complaining. I loved this time of year. The weather's temperate, it's hot, but not the killer heat of July. The sheep brought down from the hills have been washed, ready for the shearers to relieve them of their heavy fleece that took a whole year to grow. And to watch the shearers was amazing. They were so skilled, and they would work quickly and effortlessly, trying to remove each sheep's fleece in one piece. And the sheep, who'd been bang in protest, would jump up on release and scamper away. And I could imagine the men drawing the cool air on their freshly exposed skin as they kicked their legs and pranced back to the herd. I loved the noise and the dust, the smell of the sheep in their wool, the sound of the workers outside. And in the house, the smell of roasting sheep and baking bread reminded us it was a feast we would all enjoy to celebrate this wonderful bounty in the farming calendar. And I was in the middle of all the preparation of loaves of bread, plates of fig cakes, dressed lambs, when a servant came to me in an absolute state. It was one of the young men who worked in the fields. Now, Simeon was a quiet and humble man, and I knew he would not be interrupting me unless it was really important. I put down the jar of oil I was holding and passed the work I was doing on to one of the young servant girls, and I stopped to listen. As his words tumbled out, I felt my blood go cold. As a community, we were now in such grave danger because of my foolish husband's arrogance. Knowing Nabal was here, David had sent 10 of his men to greet him and to request provision at this time of the festival. They had come with polite wishes for health and long life for Nabal and his household. Then they had said that they had protected our shepherds in the pastures for the entire season, and not one animal or shepherd had been hurt or gone missing. Now they wanted some provision as a payment for their services, and they didn't even say how much they wanted. They left that up to Nabal. Now, any other courteous man would automatically have agreed, and being a time of harvest given generously for the bounty was in part due to the protection of these men. But Nabal, fool that he was, threw out insults. He questions David's bloodline and implied that he was just a badly behaved servant at best and a treasonous villain, undeserving of compensation for the hours of care and protection given. Nabal made out that David was a thief trying to get what he was not owed, and I could just picture it. Nabal puffed up like a bullfrog, pride and arrogance in his stance. The big deal, the big man. Who is this David, son of Jesse? The young men had turned their backs on him and mounted their war horses, returning to David, empty-handed after hours of protection and care. And I was devastated. What did Nabal think he was doing? These were warriors, men who fought for survival daily. They were fleeing an angry king and the royal guard. They were bloodied and battle-ready, riding war horses daily. How could he insult David, son of Jesse, slayer of Goliath, a fearless warrior, a man appointed by God to be the next king? And he may have sent just 10 respectful men, but he had about 600 men in his camp who would do whatever he said. Simeon went on to say that David's men had cared for them, ensuring none of the bandits came and took livestock or harmed the shepherds. He even said they protected them from all the predators in the hills. They had asked for nothing. They had just good-naturedly used their skills and presence to keep Nabal's men and animals safe. So this was outrageously rude, and no one would be able to speak to Nabal as he was an obnoxious and evil man who would not listen. And this I knew was true, especially if he was in a high from throwing his weight around. I knew if we were to be saved from retribution, that was sure to follow, I needed to act and act fast. I moved quickly to the main food preparation area and looked at the food we'd gotten ready for the feast. Quickly, I got the servants to pack 200 loaves, 2 pottery jars of wine. I called for 5 sheep that were already dressed and added in 5 measures of parched corn, 100 clusters of raisin, and 200 cakes of figs. We put these in baskets and carefully packed them onto donkeys. These steady beasts were great for carrying things up rocky tracks. I told the servant to get going, I would catch up to them. Quickly, I ran through to my sleeping quarters and tidied myself up. I could hear Nabal shouting something in the field outside. I just ignored him. There was no point trying to make him see reason, especially not when he was so puffed up with greed. I threw on a coat and ran outside, and Simeon was waiting for me, my donkey's reins in his hands. I mounted quickly, and that sweet, gentle creature brayed in horror as I kicked her to catch up a bit of speed to get to the caravan. I needed to be there when we reached David's men, as my servants wouldn't know what to do. I kept my eyes on the tracks and gripped tight to the donkey's mane. In a short while, I caught up with the servants and their laden beasts, and I moved through them to the very front. And now I had time to think, and my mind raced. Was this a crazy mission? I was going to try and appease a warrior, an anointed king who'd been insulted by a fool. A man cheated of his just reward, and my heart pounded in time with the donkey's hooves on the dry track. The servants had fallen a short way behind me, I think on purpose, and I couldn't really blame them. This might be the last thing I ever did. The road began to narrow to a track, valleying between two high outcrops, and as I descended, I came face to face with David and all of his men. From pounding wildly, my heart actually stopped, and I could barely draw breath. For facing me were 400 men, on horseback, spears in their hands, their faces tense but free from emotion. And I had heard the songs about David, so I picked him out quite easily. He was riding in the front, tall, well-built, handsome man. Anger hurt pride in his bearing. But he had to stop in the narrow path just to get past me, and I slid off my donkey and prostrated myself at the feet of his horse. I don't think I could have made an elegant bow. My legs were like jelly. I lay there for a moment without saying anything, aware of the silence, except for the sound of his horse's breathing above me. Sir, let me be held responsible for this wrong. Please let me speak with you. Please listen to my words. I glanced up. I had his attention. He was listening, and he did not reach for his sword. I moved to kneel in the dirt so he could hear my words. You shouldn't take this worthless person, Nabal, seriously. He's like his name. His name is Nabal, godless fool, and that's what he is. But I didn't see the young men you sent. Yahweh has kept you from spilling innocent blood and from getting a victory by your own efforts. Sir, I solemnly swear, as Yahweh and you live, may your enemies and those who are trying to harm you end up like Nabal. I dared to look up. David's face was impassive. His eyes did not move from my face. I looked back over my shoulder at the caravan of donkeys with their pack of food and gestured. Here is a gift I bring to you. May it be given to the young men who are in your service. Please forgive my offense. Yahweh will certainly give you a lasting dynasty because you are fighting Yahweh's battles. May evil never be found in you as long as you live. Even though someone pursued you and sought your life is wrapped in the bundle of life which comes from Yahweh, your Elohim. But he will dispose of the lives of your enemy like stones thrown from a sling. When Yahweh does all the good he promised and makes you ruler of Israel, you shouldn't have a troubled conscience because you spilt blood for no good reason and claimed your own victory. When Yahweh has given you success, remember me. And my words ran out. I did not know where they had come from, but could think of nothing further to say to plead my case. And I waited as the stones ground into my knees and the heat baked down onto my hair, and the silence was broken only by the sound of buzzing insects. I didn't dare look up again, so I just waited, and my palms were sweating, my throat closed. And then David's deep voice floated down from above me. Blessed be Yahweh, Elohim of Israel, who sent you today to meet me. May your good judgment be blessed. May you be blessed for keeping me from slaughtering people today and from getting a victory by my own effort. But I solemnly swear, as Yahweh, Elohim of Israel, who has kept me from harming you, lives, if you hadn't come to meet me quickly, Nabal certainly would not have seen another dawn. Relief flooded through me. David was reasonable. He'd heard me. He acknowledged that slaying Nabal's household would not show him in a good light as future king. It would be wrong. My plea had won an immediate positive response from David. he was grateful to God and to me. Praise God. His young men came and relieved my donkeys of their burden, and David said goodbye. Go home in peace. I have heard and listened to you and accepted. I'd been leaning against my donkey as they transferred the food. Now one of the soldiers helped me to remount, and David's words rang in my ears. He had praised me, called me wise woman for taking action which will stop innocent bloodshed. I shuddered at the massacre of our household that could have taken place. My hands holding the reins were still shaking. I couldn't believe I'd actually just stood before the future king of Israel and asked for mercy. I couldn't quite take in my action had saved my household from death and David's army from cold-blooded vengeance. And the whole ride home we were all silent. I focused on getting us home. And when we arrived, the sun was setting, its orange glow warming the fields. I could see the celebrations had begun, but I was exhausted, emotionally drained. Light streamed out of the front door, and Nabal's loud, drunken shouts of laughter could be heard, and I felt sick. If only he knew what his arrogance had nearly cost us all. I couldn't bear the thought of seeing him, of having to listen to his boasting and his greed. I had no heart for it. So I went through the kitchen, I made sure there was sufficient for that night's feast, and I went to bed. Sleep was slow to come. I could see the faces of the warriors, ready to take their swords up against these people. And I shivered as the night air cooled. I wondered if Nabal had even noticed the food I had taken, and I knew that I would be held to account for it the next day. Finally, I fell asleep from sheer exhaustion, and I woke quite late. My servant girls had left me to sleep, and the sound of the household getting on with its task filtered through. Utensils being washed, servants talking, the sound of a hungover man demanding breakfast. I got up and washed my face and feet and donned my dress. I wound a head wrap around my hair and went through to the living area, avoiding Nabal for as long as I possibly could. The sound of sheep could be heard from the hills, shepherds calling, all voices that would have been silenced forever. Now that fool was demanding to know where was I. Why had he not seen me at the feast? So I went through. He was sitting on a floor cushion, his back against the wall. His hair was greasy and hanging in his face. His skin was grey from drink, and his tunic was still soiled from feasting. But before he could begin to lambaste me for my absence or ask about the missing food, I told him what I had done. I told him of the 400 armed men mounted on war horses coming to kill him and his men. I told him how the gift of food had softened David's heart, and he turned back. But the consequences of his arrogance could have been absolute tragedy. Nabal listened, a piece of bread half raised to his mouth. And as I spoke, his eyes dilated, and then he went pale. He jerked upright and fell over. I moved across to his side and knelt down on the carpet. His breathing was shallow, his mouth was blue, and his skin was clammy to the touch. The servants carried his limp body to his sleeping mat, where he lay not responding for 10 days. And then, without a further word, passing his lips, the shallow wheezing stopped, and he was gone. During those 10 days, I sat vigil at Nabal's bedside. There was no great love for him, no great sadness. God had stayed David's hand, but Nabal still paid for his foolish greed, his insult to a king appointed by Yahweh. Nabal's own surliness had caused his death. As I sat there, the sound of the house moving around me, my maidservants bringing me food, I wondered what the future would hold for me. For while I could not mourn the one of such as Nabal, as a widow I had very little standing. The wealth was Nabal's, and it was a strong possibility that I would be married off to one of his relatives to keep it in the family. And the thought was repellent. But time would tell. I confessed to praying to God who had saved us that he saved me from another loveless marriage to another fool. I prayed I would get katuha, enough to live out in peace. When Nabal did die, I set about the familiar rituals of death, preparing the body, following the time-honored practices of our culture. and my heart was heavy as stone, my future rather bleak before me. And then some messengers arrived. I recognized the soldier had helped me back onto my donkey, so they came from David's camp. They had come on David's behalf. They had heard that Nabal had died and had come to ask for my hand in marriage to David. My head spun. This was an unexpected turn of events. David had been married to Micah, the king's daughter, but Saul had given her to someone else to hurt David. Did I believe my words that David was purposed by God? Marrying David would mean leaving a home with all the trappings of wealth. I would forfeit any right to Ketuha from Nabal's estate. My immediate future would be uncertain, a life on the run, surrounded by danger and discomfort. But it would also mean a life with David, the romantic hero of our nation, the gentle shepherd, the skilled musician, the songwriter, the man anointed by God, and the man who even in anger had paused to listen, who'd admitted his error and changed his course because of my words and God's intervention. I would not face a life beholden to the family of Nabal, or even worse, a new husband from that line. A life on horseback in camps surrounded by loyal men, married to a man who sought God's will and fought for him. There was no choice. I knelt down and washed the feet of the men who had come to show my willingness. Then I gathered my personal belongings and the 5 handmaidens who'd come with me to Nabal's house. I packed quickly and lightly. And once again, the same soldier helped me to mount my donkey. But this time I rode off with such a glad heart, a heart filled with hope for the future. My mind was filled with gratitude to God. Once again, he'd rescued me, and I headed off into a new adventure. This brief glimpse into the life of Abigail speaks so loudly as to the impact a wise woman can have on the life of a man. She protects both her current husband and the man who later would become her husband. Abigail seizes the information given, understood what had to be done, and then just did it. But even more importantly, and this is the bit I love the most, Abigail is a type and shadow of Christ. She comes riding a donkey. She presents an offering for Nabal's trespass. She asks David to let the total blame for the offense fall on her alone. She prophesies about David's reign, declaring his kingdom. She's a peacemaker. She washes the feet of David's servants. And once again, I stand in awe as God includes women in his redemptive plan, as he loves and honors us for all that we do. So please go to your Bibles, read 1 Samuel 25, and just enjoy the fact that God honors his women, and he honors those who obey him with gentle words and quick actions. See you next time.